They said the desert forgets no footprints. The sand might shift, the wind might howl, but somewhere under all that dust, the past still breathes. 20 years had gone by, yet every time the sun sank over the horizon and the sky turned to molten gold, he saw her eyes again. Those deep, frightened eyes of an Apache child he once pulled from death. Jake Rollins sat on the porch of his old ranch house, the wood creaking beneath his boots. The land stretched wide before him, miles of open prairie, a whisper of wind through dying grass, and the ghostly hum of crickets greeting the coming dusk. Time had painted lines across his face, but there was still something untamed in his gaze, the look of a man who'd lived his life between saddle and storm. He sipped his coffee, watching the horizon burn with sunset. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the memories that refused to die. They called him the Quiet, the Cowboy of Canyon Ridge. Folks said he'd once been a gunslinger, a man who walked away from war and blood. But Jake never cared for the stories people told. He had his cattle, his horses, his dog Ranger, and his silence. That was enough, or so he kept telling himself. But every man who's ever saved a life knows, sometimes, that life comes back to find you. That evening, as the orange light bled into night, he saw a figure approaching from the trail, a lone rider on a dark horse. The silhouette moved slow, graceful, and confident, not the swagger of a man, but the rhythm of a woman who knew how to ride the wind. Jake narrowed his eyes, pushing his hat back slightly. Visitors were rare out here, and women rarer still. When the rider reached the gate, she dismounted with a quiet ease. She wore a long, dust-stained coat, her black hair braided and falling down her shoulder. There was something fierce and calm in her posture, something that stirred a long-forgotten chord in Jake's chest. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice deep and low, the kind that carried more silence than sound. She lifted her chin, her eyes meeting his. They were dark, deep as the canyon night, and in that single moment Jake froze. "Cowboy," she said softly, "do you remember me?" Her words hit him like a bullet through the heart. "I'm the Apache girl you saved 20 years ago." Jake's heart stumbled. He blinked, the world slowing around him. Memories cracked open, the raid, the screams, the smoke rising from a burning camp. He remembered finding a child half buried in the sand, her tiny hand clutching his arm, whispering something in a language he didn't understand. He had carried her to safety, wrapped her in his coat, and left her with the missionary folk down south, never expecting to see her again. "By God," Jake whispered, his voice shaking, "your little Taya." She smiled faintly. "Taya is gone," she said. "My people gave me a new name. I'm Naya now." Jake took a slow breath. Naya. The name felt strange and sacred in his mouth. "You're all grown now." "I had to be," she replied quietly, her eyes glinting with the faintest sadness. "The world doesn't give much kindness to Apache girls, not even the ones saved by cowboys." For a long moment neither spoke. The wind rustled through the sagebrush, and the last light of day kissed the tips of the mountains. Jake looked at her, truly looked, and saw the strength that time had carved into her. She wasn't the frightened child anymore. She was a warrior of the wind, molded by the pain of her people and the loneliness of her own survival. "What brings you here, Naya?" he finally asked. Her gaze dropped to the dirt. "A promise," she said simply. "One you made." Jake frowned. "A promise? You said you'd find me again someday," she whispered, "when the world stopped burning." He froze. He hadn't remembered saying it, not clearly, not until now. But the words had come from somewhere deep, maybe as comfort to a scared little girl in the smoke of tragedy. And now she stood here 20 years later, reminding him of a vow he never thought would return to his doorstep. "I came back," she continued softly, "not for gold, not for thanks, but because I never forgot your eyes, Cowboy. I wanted to see if they still carried mercy, or if the years turned them cold." Jake looked away, the weight of his past pressing heavy on his chest. "The years do that to a man," he said quietly. "They take the fire out of him." "Or they forge him," she replied, her tone steady but full of feeling. The night deepened. A coyote howled in the far distance, and Ranger, the old dog, growled softly by Jake's feet. The smell of dust, horse sweat, and old timber filled the air. "Come inside," Jake said after a while. "You must be tired. Got stew on the stove?" Naya nodded and followed him into the cabin. The place was small but warm, walls lined with old saddles, a rifle over the door, and a faded photograph of a woman and child that no one asked about anymore. Jake poured her coffee and sat across the wooden table. For a while they just listened to the ticking of the clock. "Tell me about your life," Jake finally said. She smiled faintly. "My life was wind and dust, Cowboy. After the war took my tribe, I wandered. The missionaries tried to tame me. The soldiers tried to use me. But I ran like the river runs from fire. I found the mountains, lived with the herds, learned the medicine ways of my ancestors. And one day, I decided I wasn't born to hide." Jake nodded slowly, respect shining in his tired eyes. "You became strong," he said. "I had to," she replied. "You gave me life. I couldn't waste it." There was a silence, a good silence, the kind that speaks of two souls remembering what it means to still be here. Then Naya's eyes darkened slightly. "But I didn't just come to thank you," she said. "I came because something's coming. Something bad." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's a man," she said softly. "He's hunting me. The same kind who burned my people. He works for the railroad now, pushing through Apache land, forcing us off again. And he knows. I'm the last witness of what he did 20 years ago." Jake leaned back, his jaw tightening. "So you came to hide?" "No," she said quietly, her voice firm. "I came to fight. But I can't do it alone." The air between them grew heavy. Jake looked into those deep eyes again, eyes that had once begged him for life, and now carried the fire of vengeance. Something old stirred inside. Him, the cowboy spirit, that once rose against injustice, that had bled for the innocent. He stood up slowly, his voice low and resolute. "You're not alone anymore." Naya met his gaze, and for the first time that night, her lips curved into a true smile, a smile of trust, of memory, of something that belonged to the dust and the dawn alike. Outside, thunder rolled across the far ridges. The night seemed to promise that the past wasn't done speaking, and as the rain began to fall on the roof, Jake Rollins, the quiet cowboy, knew that the desert had finally brought his unfinished story back to him.